The colony of Haven Prime was never meant to be a fortress. It was supposed to be a foothold, an experiment in interstellar survival, built 3 decades earlier by Earth's struggling coalition. A single habitable world circling a K-class star, Haven Prime offered fertile valleys, oceans with abundant fisheries, and mineral-rich asteroids scattered across its outer belt. Humanity called it a beacon of independence, but in truth it was fragile from the beginning. The infrastructure was patchwork, part civilian transport frames retrofitted as orbital stations, part mining rigs converted into crude defense turrets. Even the colony's largest ship, the UNS Valiant, was little more than a strike cruiser stretched to its limits. The Valiant measured 420 meters bow to stern, with armor plating equivalent to late-generation stellar steel. Its spinal mount housed a twin-barreled plasma lance system capable of puncturing destroyer-grade hulls. Along its flanks, 112-point defense emplacements created a net that could shred light strike craft, though against capital warship volleys it would last minutes at best. Its complement included 6 squadrons of multi-role interceptors and a handful of strike bombers. Powered by 2 helium fusion reactors and a trio of backup capacitor banks, the Valiant was rated for mid-system engagements, not the kind of fleet war that was rumored to be brewing beyond the stars. By the standards of any major power, it was inadequate. To Haven Prime citizens, it was everything they had. Commander Darius Karan stood at the Valiant's command deck viewport, hands clasped behind his back. Age lined his face, and his dark eyes carried the calm of a man who had seen enough battles to know when bravado would get men killed. He was no visionary, no politician. He was the sort of officer who outlived the others because he didn't gamble with lives unless the odds justified the risk. His file read like a slow grind. He had defended orbital stations during Earth's cold belt skirmishes, held blockades against smugglers, and once fought pirates with nothing but a squadron of outdated frigates and stubborn crew. Karan was practical, and Haven needed that kind of man now. Life on Haven Prime was not easy. 30 years of struggle had hardened the colonists into a people who understood sacrifice. They built cities carved into cliff sides to resist storm seasons. They farmed in thin-soiled plains using reclaimed hydroponic rigs, and they mined asteroids by hand when the automated systems failed. They weren't naive. They knew their colony existed on the edge of a galaxy that had no patience for weakness. Still, they clung to their independence, telling themselves Earth had given them a future. But every colonist knew the truth whispered in corridors. If a real enemy ever came, Haven's defenses would shatter. The colony's militia drilled daily, though their equipment was inconsistent: civilian rifles upgraded with coil, accelerators, armored exosuits scavenged from mining rigs, orbital fighters that were decades behind cutting-edge designs. Pride disguised the fear. Men and women stood ready on rotating watches in the orbital stations, but their eyes carried the knowledge that they were placeholders, not professionals. Their strength was not in firepower, but in resolve, in the belief that if humanity was to expand into the stars, someone had to be the first to plant a flag and hold it. That night, Haven's fragile stability broke. The first warning came from Listening Post Theta, a converted mining station at the system's outer edge. Its long-range neutrino sweeps caught faint signatures, too regular, too patterned to be cosmic noise. At first, the operators assumed it was a convoy or perhaps a rogue trade fleet cutting across the periphery. Then the signals multiplied. The sweep registered not a handful, but dozens of capital-sized objects moving in coordinated formation. Karan was summoned immediately. He walked into the operations pit where the projection screens flickered with red outlines. His officers were pale. One of them, Lieutenant Marrow, muttered under his breath, "That can't be right." But it was. The analysis confirmed it. 12 system crackers, with escort destroyers in tow, were burning hard toward Haven Prime. By galactic standards, a system cracker was not simply a warship, it was a weapon of erasure. These capital ships stretched between 800 and 1,000 meters, armored in alloys beyond humanity's production capacity, with spinal fusion lance arrays designed to shatter orbital platforms in minutes. Each carried enough payload to bombard a planet's surface into glass. Standard doctrine estimated that 5 fully equipped human strike cruisers would be needed to match one system cracker in open combat. Haven had one. Reports flooded in across secure comms. Civilian traffic panicked. Freighters rushed to dock. Miners abandoned rigs in the asteroid belt. And militia commanders begged for orders. Quran absorbed it all silently. The Valiant's deck trembled slightly as emergency power cycles brought its weapons online. Haven Prime had 30 minutes before the fleet crossed the mid-system threshold. Quran spoke evenly, though his voice carried across the deck like steel. Confirm the fleet vector. Cross-check with all stations. Then broadcast to the Colony Council. Haven Prime is under direct threat of hostile incursion. His second-in-command hesitated. Sir, 12 system crackers? That's not an incursion. That's an execution order. Quran did not flinch. Call it what you like. Our duty hasn't changed. The officers returned to their stations. Outside the viewport, the faint glow of Haven Prime's orbital stations shimmered in the darkness. Below, the colony's continents were streaked with thin lines of light where cities burned against the night. Every colonist down there would be listening too. The first alarms by now. Fear would spread fast. Quran allowed himself one moment of reflection. He thought of the old wars back home. Skirmishes fought with outnumbered frigates, battles where ingenuity and stubbornness won what brute force could not. Humanity had survived because they refused to collapse under pressure. Haven Prime was no different. They were weak in weapons, yes, but weakness was only final if you accepted it. Signal all stations, Corin ordered. We hold position. No panic. And prepare the fallback code. Operation Mirage is to be armed and awaiting my command. The room fell silent. Officers exchanged quick, uneasy glances. Mirage, a word spoken in drills, in theoretical planning sessions, but never once activated in real battle. It was the colony's greatest gamble, one that could only work once, and only if their enemy underestimated humanity enough to believe the lie. The signatures drew closer. 12 red icons became distinct, their heat blooming as reactors bled through sensor filters. The Dominion was coming, and they were coming fast. For 30 years, Haven Prime had lived under the assumption that expansion would be tolerated, that humanity could quietly stake a claim while the great powers ignored them. That illusion died in the span of one sensor sweep. The Dominion had found them, and the first colony of mankind now stood on the edge of annihilation. Commander Darius Quran watched the incoming fleet icons without expression. He had seen death before. He had buried friends before. If this was to be humanity's final stand in this system, then so be it. But he would not let Haven fall without a fight. Let them come, he murmured. We'll see how they handle ghosts. Let them come. We'll see how they handle ghosts. Meanwhile, out beyond Haven Prime's pale sun, Fleet Master Vorun reclined in the command cradle of his flagship, like a king watching peasants build bonfires. The holosphere above the pit shimmered with little blue sparks. Human ships, 5 in total, huddled tight around their world. 5. He almost laughed aloud. To call that a fleet is generous, Vorun said, his mandibles twitching with amusement. 1 cruiser, 4 escorts. I've seen smugglers with heavier screens. The officers arranged in their tiers below him gave the expected chuckles. They knew their roles. Agreement was part of discipline. Strategist Ral raised his chin. The council will be pleased. We can trim this colony without denting our magazines. Varun spread his hands as though weighing the absurdity. This is why small species should never play empire. 5 ships. They still think numbers are just numbers. The holosphere widened on his gesture, casting their true strength across the amphitheater in lines of red light. 12 system crackers, vast, kilometer-long hulls, bristling with spinal lances and torpedo wells, formed the backbone. Screens of destroyers. Wrapped them, frigates wove the gaps. Corvettes darted forward like eager hounds, a wall of metal and energy wide enough to blot out starlight. Against 5 human ships, it was obscene. That was the point. Remember the plan, Varun said. This is not extermination. This is theater. The galaxy will see their courage reduced to ash, and it will think twice before whispering treaties with Sol. His logistics master, Torvak, tilted his head. Efficient theater, fleet master. No overkill, controlled fire. Strip their orbitals. Break the cruiser on camera. Leave the ground intact. A tax-paying colony frightens neighbors more than a dead rock. Varun grinned. Exactly. We are not monsters. We are accountants. The room stirred with dry laughter. Even here in the Dominion's war machine, there was pride and restraint. That restraint, of course, was carefully staged. Send the demand, Varun ordered. Simple words, no honey. The comms officer straightened. To Haven Prime from the Dominion. Power down your defenses. Surrender your cruiser. Your leaders will present themselves at your port. Comply and you live. Refuse. He trailed off, glancing up. Varun finished for him, amused. And you'll learn why sandcastles don't argue with tides. The demand pulsed across the system. Varun leaned back again, already savoring the panic it must have caused. 5 ships against his wall. It wasn't a battle. It was a lesson. Mark the cruiser, Varun said lazily, eyes narrowing on the human flagship. The hungry-looking one. I want it cut from bow to stern, a clean line for every lens in range. Strategist Ral dipped his head. 2 hours, Fleet Master. When the heavies form the wall, we'll begin. 5 warships will not even scratch our paint. A junior officer muttered under his breath, thinking no one could hear. We could do it with 3. Varun caught it and barked a laugh. With 1 if we were feeling poetic, but 12. 12 leaves, no doubts. Moments later, the reply came back from Haven Prime. 1 line, no embellishment. Come and see. The room went still, not afraid, just that odd silence that comes when prey refuses the script. Varun smiled anyway, sharp and cruel. Good. They'll look heroic in the first minute. Then we'll edit. He flicked his claws toward the tiny blue spark in the holosphere. Ready the wall. In 2 hours, the galaxy remembers what mass looks like. The reply had gone out, just 4 words. Come and see. And now as the Dominion heavies slid into their oh-so-perfect parade line, Commander Darius Corrin stood on the Valiant's bridge staring at the tactical overlays. 5 little blue dots, his entire fleet, huddled tight around a planet that had no business surviving a Dominion wall. He could feel the crew's eyes on him, waiting, hoping, some of them silently begging for an order that wasn't brace for impact. Corrin cleared his throat. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. All stations initiate Mirage Protocol. There it was, the word no one thought they'd ever hear outside of drills. The ops deck went dead quiet for a heartbeat, like the ship itself sucked in air, and then the room snapped alive. Dozens of techs hunched over consoles. Relay officers started barking to outlying stations, and the Valiant's reactor tapped a fresh surge into hidden comm lines. Out in the belt, the ghost began to wake. It started as a trickle, 1 or 2 faint spikes in the Dominion's long-range sensors, little hiccups that looked like background static. Then the spikes began to multiply. Reactor echoes bloomed across the asteroid belt, one after another, each tuned to mimic the heat curve of a cruiser, a destroyer, even the long hum of capital-grade drives. By the time the second wave came online, Dominion instruments were staring at not 5 human warships, but 40-plus distinct signatures scattered in careful formation. On the Valiant's bridge, Lieutenant Marrow grinned despite himself. Look at that. They're gonna choke on it. Corrin didn't grin. He drilled it into his officers. Mirage wasn't a toy. It wasn't magic. It was a single throw of the dice, and if the Dominion figured it out too soon, all Haven had left was rubble. Still, watching the red tactical overlay bloom with phantom blue icons did something to the gut. It felt, for the first time since the alarm, that maybe the colonists weren't walking into a slaughter. He leaned toward comms. Loop false comm chatter through the relays. Keep it messy. Arguments, half-finished orders, anything that sounds human. If they're listening, make them think half the fleet's drunk. Yes, sir. The asteroid belt itself carried the rest of the illusion. From the Dominion's vantage, energy flares matched drive wakes. Faint EM fuzz looked like long-range radar sweeps, and even comm lag had been modeled to give the sense of a dozen squadrons barking at each other. It wasn't flawless, but it didn't need to be. Dominion doctrine didn't deal in maybe. Their calculators compared tonnage and came back with answers. 40 signatures meant 40 ships. Down on Haven Prime, colonists crowded rooftops and ridgetops, staring upward at skies they couldn't see into. Rumors move faster than orders. The ghost fleet's out there. We've got a whole armada waiting. Nobody corrected them. If belief kept people steady, Corrin wasn't about to ruin it. On the Dominion flagship, though, belief was cracking in the opposite direction. Varun had expected panic, quick capitulation, maybe a half-hearted volley before surrender. Instead, his sensor chiefs were feeding him reports of a belt that suddenly pulsed with hostile signatures. Dozens of them. Cruisers, destroyers, too many to be explained away as civilian rigs. Strategist Ral leaned over his tier, voice tight. Fleet Master, the count reads 42 human hulls. It contradicts earlier scans. Contradicts reality, Varun shot back. His mandibles clicked in irritation. 5 warships we saw. 5 Mardek. The sensor chief shifted in his seat. With respect, the signatures match reactor curves. They look consistent. It could be a masked reserve, or... He hesitated, unwilling to say it. Or? Varun pressed, eyes narrowing. Or the humans don't act like others, Mardek admitted. They've never followed orthodox doctrine. Our previous contacts suggest they favor trickery. Trickery, Varun repeated, tasting the word like it offended him. You're telling me 5 warships grew into 40 because humans enjoy tricks? No one answered, and that silence said enough. Varun exhaled a hiss. Fine, then we test it. Dispatch 2 wings of destroyers. Sweep the belt. If the humans are hiding real ships, we'll flush them. If they're phantoms, his smile came back, cruel and sharp. Then we'll shred their little theater and show the galaxy how their magicians vanish. Back on the Valiant, the order was already expected. Corrin tapped the hollow as Dominion destroyer groups peeled away from the wall, heading straight for the belt. Big teeth sent to snap at shadows. Here we go, Marrow muttered. His hands hovered over his console like a gambler, waiting to throw dice. Corrin stayed calm, voice even. Hold position, let them come close, let them doubt, and when they're close enough, he let the pause hang, eyes sweeping across his bridge crew. We feed them the first bite. A nervous laugh rippled across the pit. One of the younger techs whispered, Hope they like the taste. Don't hope, Corrin said flatly. Make damn sure. Out in the dark, the Dominion destroyers swept forward, arrogant as their master. Mirage glowed all around them, phantom fleets flexing in the shadows. And somewhere, hidden inside the rocks, old freighter hulls bristling with torpedo racks waited with their safeties off. The trap was almost ready. The ghosts were already dancing. The Dominion destroyers came on like sharks that smelled blood, running hot drives straight into the belt. 2 wings, neat and crisp, moving with that machine book precision only a trained fleet could manage. On Haven Prime, people saw nothing, but they could feel it. Rumors spread like sparks on dry grass. The Dominion's sending hunters in. Ghost fleet's about to fight. Mothers clutched kids tighter. Miners stared up at black skies with clenched jaws. On the Valiant, the tension was something you could chew. Every eye flicked from the tactical sphere to Koran and back again. The colonists might have been panicking, but the bridge had its own silent countdown ticking. Mirage was humming at full burn now, feeding echoes into the void like a puppet show. 40 Phantom cruisers and destroyers painted across every Dominion scan, and here came Varun's dogs to sniff at the stage. Lieutenant Marrow broke the silence first. They're flying straight into it, sir. No hesitation. Of course they are, Corrin said evenly, like he was commenting on the weather. They think we're liars and they want to prove it fast. He leaned over the hollow, watching red icons creep into blue illusions. Good. Let them. The destroyers cut deeper, sensors sweeping, trying to pin phantoms to rock. The Dominion commander of that wing must have thought he was clever, splitting formation into a wide net, noses angled to sweep overlapping fields. To him it was science. Cross-check echoes, filter out trash, move on. From Karan's seat, it looked like a wolf sniffing at tripwires. Down in the colony shelters, the panic spiked. Someone screamed that the Ghost Fleet was a bluff, that it was just empty asteroids. Others shouted back, swearing the ships were real, swearing they'd seen the signatures themselves. The militia captains tried to keep order, But fear doesn't care about ranks. All Corrin could do for them was buy time. Range? He asked. 70,000 clicks, Marrow answered, eyes locked to his display. Closing fast. Corran nodded once. That was close enough. Any further, and the Dominion's math would start pulling apart the edges of Mirage. Too far, and they'd see shadows instead of hulls. Too close, and they'd realize nothing was shooting back. He needed them right here. Signal the buses, Corrin ordered. His tone was flat, but his crew knew the weight in it. All across the belt, ancient freighter hulls stirred awake. They looked like junk, scarred, slow, civilian frames gutted and rebuilt by desperate hands. Their cargo bays were lined not with ore crates, but with racks of plasma torpedoes, suicide boats painted with the names of miners and cousins and friends who'd welded them in the dark. The crews were long gone. Each bus ran remote now, slave to the Valiant's fire control. Let them get one more scan, Corrin said. Let them think they're clever. The Dominion destroyers pushed deeper. Their scans lit up phantom cruisers, phantom carriers, phantom drive wakes curling through the rocks. And then one unlucky ship nosed a little too close, its sweep bouncing straight off the hull of a waiting bus. For half a heartbeat, it would have looked like another fake, just a heat bloom. And then the safeties dropped. The belt lit up like a thunderstorm. Dozens of torpedoes spat out from freighter guts, thrusters screaming, tails burning white against the dark. They streaked straight into the destroyer wing before the Dominion's point defense could even blink awake. The first salvo hit home, 2 destroyers shredded bow to midship, armor plates peeling like paper as plasma lances tore through their guts. Explosions punched holes wide enough to swallow shuttles. Contact, Marrow said, but his voice was too calm for what everyone felt. The rest of the wing tried to react. PD nets opening up, rail bursts firing wild into the storm. They caught some of the torpedoes, sure, but it was too many, too fast. The freighters had been waiting years for this. Another salvo struck, and another Dominion destroyer folded in on itself, venting atmosphere in a long silver scream. On the Valiant's deck, someone muttered, "Holy hell!" Another whispered, "We actually hit them." And then the whole bridge went quiet again, like nobody wanted to break the spell. Corran's face never changed. He kept his eyes locked on the tactical feed. Don't cheer yet, it's not done. Because it wasn't. The Dominion ships weren't helpless. They were predators after all. The survivors of the first blast regrouped, their commanders snapping tight nets, PD lines overlapping, counter barrages cutting swathes through the belt. A few buses were torn apart, their torpedoes spilling uselessly into space. But the trap had already sprung. The last wave hit like a hammer. 2 more destroyers went silent, hulls venting into vacuum, drives flickering out. The survivors, barely half their number, jerked back, formation collapsing. From Varun's perfect wall, the red icons shivered, a ripple of confusion. On Haven Prime, militia captains shouted over comms, voices breaking with excitement. "They're dying out there. Ghost Fleet's real. It's real." Colonists roared in shelters, some crying, some laughing, all clinging to the thought that maybe, just maybe, humanity wasn't already doomed. Corran didn't smile. He watched the feed as the Dominion destroyers limped back toward their main fleet, battered, bleeding, humiliated. He knew Varun would be livid. He knew this bought them time, nothing more. But time was enough. He turned to his officers. "Good work. Reset the buses that survived. Ready Mirage for the next trick." Marrow finally let himself grin. "We just made the Dominion bleed." Corran shook his head, quiet but steady. We just made them angry. That's worse. So stay sharp." Out beyond the belt, Varun's wall was shifting, the perfect line twitching as new orders cut through. The fleet master had just seen 5 human warships turn into 40 phantoms, and then watched his destroyer wing die for it. Whatever came next wasn't going to be patient. The ghosts had drawn blood. Now the wolves would come howling. The asteroid belt was still glowing with fire when the last of the Dominion destroyers tried to crawl back to their line. A few made it, scarred, half-venting, drives sputtering like old engines choking on sand. The rest, gone. Torn apart in silence, nothing left but broken plates drifting, sparks flashing like dying stars. On the Valiant's bridge, no one breathed at first. The tactical holo still showed the kills, clean blue marks where the Dominion icons had winked out. You could feel the tension uncoil in the room. Not a release, more like a collective holy hell that actually worked. Marrow whispered it before anyone else did. "We got 'em. We actually got the bastards." Someone laughed, high and shaky. Another muttered a prayer. For the first time since the alarms had gone out, there was noise on the deck that wasn't panic or clipped orders. The crew looked at each other like they'd just broken some impossible curse. Corin didn't smile. He let them have their moment, then cut through it with that calm, sandpaper voice of his. "Don't celebrate too loud. That was the first round. They'll answer it harder." He was right, of course, because this strike, the buses, the torpedo swarms, that wasn't regular Navy kit. Those weren't warships, not in the Dominion sense. They were suicide freighters, the kind Earth had been cobbling together ever since it realized no one in the galaxy was going to play fair. Civilian hulls stripped down and rebuilt, their cargo bays lined with racks of plasma warheads. No crews aboard, no escape pods, just remote piloting and one purpose: get close enough, vomit enough fire, and die. It was desperation tech, ugly and cheap, the kind of thing humans built because they had no other choice. To the Dominion, it probably looked barbaric. To Haven, it looked like survival. And it had worked. 6 destroyers gone in minutes. The belt had eaten them alive. Down on Haven Prime, the colony shelters shook with cheers. People clapped, cried, hugged strangers. Militia captains were swamped with messages. "Ghost Fleet's real. We're not helpless. We just killed them." In streets where fear had been strangling breath, there was suddenly laughter, raw and defiant. It was the kind of victory humanity hadn't tasted since Earth first clawed back orbital control. But victories like that come with a price. Every freighter bus that launched its payload was gone too. Dozens of them, hulks welded together by volunteers, named after dead miners, signed with paint by school children who'd drawn stars on their sides. The crews who'd built them had poured months of sweat into hulls they knew would never come back. Nobody was riding them, sure, but people felt the loss all the same. On the Valiant, Coran looked over the casualty tallies, quiet as ever. "They bought us blood for time," he said. "Make it worth it." His crew nodded, solemn again. They knew what those sacrifices meant. Out beyond the belt, Varun's wall rippled. Perfect Dominion geometry. 12 system crackers, escorts nested tight, had shivered like a beast struck across the nose. The fleet master's jaw locked as the reports poured in. Half a destroyer wing gone to freighters. Freighters. "Cowards' tricks," he spat, his mandibles clicking with anger. "They hide in rocks and throw trash at us." Strategist Raul tried to smooth it over. "Effective trash, fleet master. We underestimated their willingness to—" "Silence," Vorun snapped. "They think dying like vermin is clever? Then we will grind their vermin holes into dust, bring the jammers online, strip their illusions, and send the feeds wide. The galaxy will see that humans only win by crawling in filth." His bridge crew bowed their heads, but nobody missed the edge of panic creeping through. This wasn't supposed to happen. Doctrine said humans fold. Doctrine said 5 ships die quietly. Now Doctrine was staring at the wreckage of 6 destroyers and couldn't explain it. Coran, watching the same wreckage from the other side, saw something else. An empire rattled. Not beaten, not broken, but rattled. "Mark it," he said quietly to his officers. "We've given them a bruise. They'll come at us with knives now, and that's when they'll start making mistakes." Marrow looked over at him, brows furrowed. "Sir, we can't stop 12 system crackers with bruises." "No," Corin admitted, "but we can make them bleed in front of their own cameras, and sometimes humiliation hurts more than loss." The crew exchanged glances. It was insane logic. It was also the only kind humanity had ever survived on. Down in the shelters, people clung to the news of the kill. Old miners banged fists on tables. Mothers whispered to kids that ghosts had chased the monsters away. It didn't matter if the truth was uglier, that those ghosts were just freighters packed with bombs. To the colonists, what mattered was simple. Humanity had drawn blood from the giant, And somewhere in that knowledge, fear cracked just a little. Corrin stood at the viewport, watching the Dominion wall shift. He didn't kid himself. This wasn't victory. This was just a spark in a storm. But sparks mattered. Sparks could start fires. "Tell the colony," he said at last, "that the Ghost Fleet held." And for the first time since the Dominion appeared on their doorstep, those words felt like they weren't a lie. The belt was still littered with wreckage when the Dominion came back swinging. Not with more destroyers this time. Not with another probing run. No, they'd had enough of that. Now they brought out the real toys. On the Valiant's bridge, the tactical hollow fuzzed like static, half the Phantom ships blinking, half of them stuttering in and out. Dominion jammers had lit up the system like a bonfire, drowning every band Haven used. Their sweeps rolled over the belt in wide arcs, trying to peel the ghosts apart from the rocks. The neat wall of system crackers pulsed brighter, their signatures sharp, aggressive, like they were flexing muscle just to prove they still owned the room. Marrow cursed under his breath. "They're jamming everything. Mirage is wobbling." "Of course it's wobbling," Corrin said, calm as stone. "That's what it's supposed to do. If it looked perfect, they'd know it was fake." That was the genius of Mirage. It wasn't some miracle cloak that made asteroids look like battleships. It was a dirty trick layered on the Dominion's own arrogance. Their algorithms, their calculators, their precious doctrine, all of it was built on comparing mass, reactor output, fleet posture. Mirage fed their machines just enough chaos to confuse certainty. And when you live by certainty, confusion could kill you faster than a lance. "Keep the fuzz," Corrin ordered. "Shift the echoes. Make the cruisers stutter. Make the carriers fight each other for bandwidth. They'll see ghosts fighting ghosts. Let them chase shadows until they burn holes in their own charts." The crew worked fast, reconfiguring emitters, dragging Phantom signatures across Dominion sweeps. Every time the enemy jammers roared, Mirage twisted with it, turning counter-sensor beams into noise that looked like drive wakes and reactor flares. It was ugly, messy, and it was working. For now. But Corrin knew the Dominion wasn't going to stop at sweeps. Sooner or later, they'd throw mass into the belt. And when they did, Mirage wouldn't be enough. He needed more than shadows. He needed a knife they didn't see coming. That was where the Revenant came in. The ship had been sitting in Haven's docks for years, written off as a relic. On paper, it was a gutted carrier. Too slow to run, too fragile to fight, more museum piece than warship. But tucked inside its belly was the most dangerous gamble humanity had ever built, the phase insertion drive. The crew called it a blink. It wasn't real FTL, not the kind the Dominion used for long hauls. This was different. A brutal short-range jump that bent space-time just enough to rip a ship from one spot to another inside a system. No warning, no build-up, just here 1 second, there the next. Unstable as hell. You got maybe a handful of safe uses before the coils cooked themselves or the ship tore apart. And Corrin had kept it buried, hidden under false maintenance logs, waiting for the moment when nothing else would hold the line. Now with Dominion sweeps clawing at Mirage and the wall pressing closer, that moment was staring him in the face. He called his senior officers into the Valiant's war room. No hollows, no projections. Just a table and tired men leaning over it. "We're bringing the Revenant online," Corrin said. The room froze. One of them actually swore out loud. Another shook his head like he hadn't heard right. "That drive isn't combat certified," Marrow said, his voice cracked between disbelief and fear. "Last I saw the test files, half the engineers said it should have killed everyone aboard." Corrin didn't blink. They weren't wrong. "Then why risk it now?" another officer asked. "Because tricks won't hold them forever," Corrin answered. "And if the Dominion's going to keep measuring fleets by tonnage, we need to show them something they can't measure. We blink the IU, Revenant inside their wall, board one of their heavies, and cut its guts out. They'll choke on the shock long enough for Mirage to matter again." Silence. Nobody wanted to admit it made sense. Nobody wanted to say it out loud either. Finally, Marrow rubbed his face and muttered, "We're actually going to do it, huh? We're going to blink a damn carrier into the middle of 12 system crackers." Corrin gave him the faintest of nods. "Better than waiting for them to peel us open." Back on the Valiant's bridge, tension kept crawling higher. Dominion sweeps kept hammering the belt, jammers roaring, ghosts flickering in and out like bad holograms. Colonists down on Haven whispered prayers, trying to pretend the phantom fleet above was still holding steady. Every minute the illusion lasted was another minute of hope they desperately clung to. And every minute, Karan watched the Revenant systems flicker online. Its coils hummed, its capacitors charged, its skeleton crew boarded in silence. Men and women who knew they might not come back strapped in without complaint. Marrow stood beside Corin at the viewport, eyes on the Dominion wall glowing like a blade across the dark. "Sir," he said quietly, "if this goes wrong, if the blink tears her apart—" Corin cut him off. "Then she dies buying us time. Same as the freighters, same as all of us if we sit still." Marrow exhaled, long and slow. "You don't leave much room for hope, do you?" "Hope doesn't win wars," Corin said. "Making the enemy screw up does." The Revenant drifted free from its dock, a scarred silhouette against Haven's pale sun. To the Dominion, it looked like another relic, another hull not worth the ammo. To Karan, it was a blade with a single swing. As the jammers screamed and Mirage twisted the Dominion sensors into knots, the Revenant angled its prow toward the wall. And for the first time that day, Karan allowed himself the faintest flicker of a smile. "Let's see how they handle ghosts that bite back." The Revenant slid out from Haven's shadow like a knife leaving a sheath. Old scars, scorched paint, hull rattling if you stood in the wrong corridor. Yeah, she looked tired. Good. Let them think she's a museum piece. On the Valiant, Karan watched her nose angle at the Dominion wall and didn't blink. "Do it," he said. The Revenant's phase coils screamed, felt more than heard, a pressure behind the eyes, gravity going greasy for half a heartbeat. Stars snapped, distance folded, and the carrier was suddenly there, buried inside the Dominion screen where no sane ship had any business being. One moment empty space, the next a human hull riding a blind cone under the belly of a system cracker the size of a city block. "Holy!" Marrow bit it off. No time. The Dominion's point defense twitched, then woke in a panic. Lances tried to pivot, too slow at knife fight range. The Revenant nosed harder, into the heavy shadow, hugging that thin, blessed wedge where big guns couldn't depress and little guns didn't have line of sight. From this close, you saw details you weren't supposed to see on a warship. The maintenance spines, thermal scarring along lance housings, the welded plates where someone had patched a fight they'd assumed no one would ever get close enough to notice. "Launch," Corin said, voice flat. 4 breacher barges punched off the Revenant's ribs, stubby, armored, mean. They weren't elegant. They were battering rams with seats. Each barge carried a squad of Marines, shaped charges, cutting lances, and the kind of attitude that gets people killed or makes legends. Their thrusters flared and they leapt for the Dominion Heavy's spine. Inside Barge 2, Sergeant Ivo Rask gripped the overhead rail and grinned like a lunatic. "You hear that?" he yelled over the clatter. "That's the sound of them not believing we exist." Private Jan Voigt swallowed hard. "Serge, if we miss the spine—" "We don't miss," Rask said. "We stick, we cut, we ruin someone's day." The impact hit like a train. Magnets slammed, anchors bit, and the barge became part of the enemy hull. The breacher plate glowed cherry, went white, blew inward with a thump that punched the air out of their chests. Rask kicked through the smoke, rifle up, boots ringing on alien metal. Inside smelled like hot copper and burned oil. Narrow service corridor. Good. They'd landed where the schematic said the maintenance artery that fed down toward Engineering Section 3, close enough to the reactor farms to feel the thrum in the soles. Zerath crew tumbled around the bend, weapons up, tall, armored, chitin plates flaring along the cheeks. They weren't ready for humans at spitting distance. Rask put 2 down fast. "Left! Left!" he barked, and Voigt, to his credit, moved like he'd trained for this all his terrified life. The squad flowed up the artery, chewing through brittle security postings. Dominion was built for mass duels, not rats in its arteries. Every corner, every hatch, every ladder. Humans moved like a bad idea spreading, They hit Engineering 3 and hell came out to meet them. Heat slammed their faces. A control gallery hung like a catwalk above the reactor manifold. A forest of containment cans and magnet coils, all humming, all dangerous. Everything the Dominion trusted more than it trusted people. Alarms chased each other from wall to wall in colors they didn't bother to learn. Targets, Rask snapped. You know the picture. Bottles and coolant. We don't blow it, we make it sweat. That was the trick. You don't try to pop a reactor like a firework unless you want to die with it. You stress it, you crack a coolant vein, you lag the magnetic feed, you jam relief valves half open and let pressure climb where it shouldn't. You make the ship's own safeties start screaming at its captain. Scram me or I go places you don't survive. Voight skidded under a pipe bundle, yanked a charge from his pack, slapped it on the coolant manifold, counted, popped the primer. The plastic squib hissed and the alloy around it sagged like old ice. Steam vented. Thin, wrong, deadly. Up on the catwalk, a Zerath officer lunged for a hardline cutoff. Rask put a round through the lever and another through the officer's visor. Nope, he said. You don't get to fix this. Two Marines dragged a cable the size of a tree trunk and clipped it where a magnet feed left its housing. Sparks spit, danced across the floor. Their boots grounded it like saints. Another team sprinted a bundle of ghost keys, ugly little injectors that lied to local sensors, into the diagnostic rack. In 20 seconds, the Heavy's computer would think it had a dozen microfractures and a containment wobble in a place that never wobbled. Downrange, close-quarter gunfire turned to wrestling on graded decks. Someone screamed. Someone else kept moving, because that's what you do. Rask's shoulder sang where a round had kissed the armor. He ignored it. He tore the covers off a relief cluster and jammed the arms with a wedge. Come on, you pig, he muttered to the reactor. Sweat for me. The deck shuddered. Not from them. From the ship. You could feel it. A bass note under your feet, rising from the manifold chest like a growl. Lights shifted. Air changed. Things that wanted to be cold were getting less cold in a hurry. Sarge, Voight panted, eyes wide. I think we did it. We started it, Rask said. He keyed his mic. Rask to Revenant. Engineering's ugly. Getting uglier. On the Dominion flagship, Varun felt it like a slap. His wall had held, his crews had steadied after the belt. Now his Heavy, one of his 12, was screaming for a scram from inside, and he didn't have a picture of why. The comms poured with contradicting calls. Borders, fire, containment drift, phantom alarms. His counsel stared at him, all cool composure shaken. How, he said, each letter an icicle. Did humans get inside a harrow? No one had an answer worth breathing. Back in Engineering 3, Zerath reinforcements surged through a bulkhead that should have locked. They came hard. Shock shields, crackling batons, rifles that stitched the air. 2 Marines went down, one still, one loud. Rask vaulted the rail, dropped onto a tech pit, and fired into a knot of them until the knot untied itself. Time, Rask snapped. Call the time. Ghost keys red, Voight said, voice small. Containment wants to scram. Safeties are fighting it. If they keep it hot, she's gonna... Not our problem, Rask said. We leave them with a choice. Drown her or let her explode. Either way, we've done our job. He reached for the last charge, bigger, uglier, sticker thick with warning paint, and planted it under the manifold spine. That one wasn't for pressure games. That was for no backsies. They taught it in training like a prayer. If they start to recover, make sure they don't. Package set, he said. On me. We ghost. Pulling out was the dirty part. Everything behind them wanted to eat them. Bulkheads locking wrong, security squads getting braver, the ship groaning like it had learned new swear words. Rask shoved Voight through the hole they'd made, shoved another Marine after him, took one last look at the gallery where aliens were trying to bandage a jugular with a bandana, and dove through himself. The breacher barges tore free, magnets howling. 2 peeled clean. 1 dragged and died, stuck to a piece of plating that wasn't ready to let go. The men inside kept shooting until they vanished in white light. Rask's barge kicked hard, thrusters spitting, and flung itself back toward the Revenant. On Kuran's viewport, the Harrow-class Heavy flared like a wound. Vent ports woofed, dumping plasma in long, ugly ropes. Emergency doors slammed. The ship rolled her belly toward vacuum, trying to spill heat into the dark. But the numbers didn't care about pride. She was sick, and every ship on that wall could tell. Varun's mandibles scraped together. "Scuttle," he hissed. "Order the captain to drown her. Now!" Across his fleet, officers looked at each other like they'd just watched their admiral eat a bad fruit. Scuttle a Heavy during a demonstration? In view of half the border? But the math didn't argue. The Harrow was cooking herself alive. The ship's skin blew in 3 places. Petal open, controlled. Too neat for a detonation. Too violent for anything else. The reactors drowned under brine and boron. The lances went dark. The hull slumped like a boxer who knows the bell means mercy. Drones scattered. Tenders pivoted to grab survivors and got told to stand off, because the air around that ship was poisoned for a while. On the Revenant, the surviving barges slammed home. Rask fell out of his harness and onto warm deck plating, chest heaving. Voight flopped beside him, laughed and cried in the same breath. Someone clapped Rask on the helmet so hard his teeth clicked. "You mad bastard," the someone said, grinning. "You did it." Rask rolled to his back, stared at the ceiling. "We did it," he corrected. Then he turned his head and counted. He didn't get to 7. His face tightened. "Where's Hoyo?" No one answered. The silence did. Kuran took it all in without letting it show. One Harrow scuttled, borders bloodied, Revenant not torn in half by the blink. A miracle by human standards. A humiliation by Dominion ones. And a problem because now the trick was out. The phase gambit wasn't a rumor anymore. It was on 100 lenses and 1,000 feeds. Every admiral who mattered would be replaying the moment a human carrier appeared where it couldn't, and a Heavy died because of it. Marrow exhaled, shaky, half laugh, half sob. "We actually punched a hole in their wall." Corin didn't celebrate. He watched the Dominion formation twitch, the neat parade shiver into something meaner. Fury had a shape, and he could see it forming. "We showed them our knife," he said quietly. "They won't fall for it twice." "Was it worth it?" Marrow asked. Corin's eyes stayed on the dying Heavy, on tiny dots that were escape pods and other dots that were men who weren't coming home. "Ask Haven," he said. "Ask the people who just got 1 more hour to live." The Revenant rolled back toward the belt, battered and very much alive, the phase coils cooling like a beast that had sprinted past its lungs. In its hangar, Rask sat up, pulled his helmet off, and wiped his eyes with the heel of his hand. He wasn't crying. He told himself that twice. Around him, men thumped shoulders and counted names and didn't say the ones they were missing. Out in the dark, the Dominion flagship's council tried to stitch composure back over panic. Varun stared at the wound in his wall and smiled a dead smile that didn't reach his eyes. "They cheated," he said softly. "Good. Now we cheat better." Corin heard none of that. He stood at the viewport, hands behind his back, and let the smallest, meanest smile touch his mouth. "Ghosts bite," he said, mostly to himself. "Now let's see how they howl." He turned away, already calling for Mirage to bend again, already thinking 3 moves ahead. The secret was spent. The game was not. The colony below still breathed. That was enough for today. The Harrow's death hung over the Dominion wall like a bad smell. You couldn't hide it. Half the fleet had seen the reactor bloom, the emergency scuttle, the drones scattering like frightened birds. In Varun's amphitheater, the holosphere replayed it whether he wanted it to or not. A human carrier blinking where no carrier should be, borders carving up a reactor bay, and a Heavy-class warship drowning itself rather than stay alive in shame. Varun's mandibles twitched so tight they scraped. "Explain to me," he said, voice like broken glass, "how a species with 5 ships just carved the heart out of a Harrow." The chamber went quiet. His council shifted in their seats, eyes flicking anywhere but at him. Strategist Rahl, always the cautious one, broke first. "Fleet Master, we misjudged. Humanity doesn't fight like the border powers. They don't trade salvos until one side folds. They twist the rules. Mirage illusions. Suicide freighters. Now, phase insertion." Doctrine never accounted for. Doctrine accounts for everything, Vorun snapped. His hand slammed the cradle arm, echoing through the chamber. The math is eternal. Numbers are eternal. They cannot cheat mathematics. And yet, muttered Mardek, the censor chief, the math keeps bleeding. A ripple of shock ran through the officers. No one contradicted the fleet master like that. Varun's head swiveled, eyes burning, but Mardek didn't flinch. They've beaten probes. They've bled destroyers. They've made us scuttle our own heavy, Mardek said evenly. If doctrine cannot explain it, then doctrine is broken against them. Rahl seized the opening. We should withdraw, Fleet Master, not in defeat, in recalculation. Return with the full weight of a Dominion line, not this demonstration force. Otherwise, we risk turning a lesson into a humiliation. Torvek, the logistics master, snarled. Retreat? And tell the council we lost to illusions and rats and ducks? They'd have our heads before the pods opened. No, we press. Overwhelm them before the lie spreads further. The room split. Voices rose, claws tapped, wings flicked in agitation. Half wanted to cut losses, half wanted to burn Haven into an object lesson, so savage no one would ever whisper of humans again. Varun listened, face hard, and said nothing. Because deep down, even he knew what rattled them most. This wasn't war as the Dominion understood it. The Zerath built their empire on certainty. You weighed fleets like coins, stacked mass against mass, committed when the ratio tilted. That was Dominion doctrine, predictable, clinical, comforting, and now they were fighting a species that didn't play the math. Humanity didn't meet them tonnage for tonnage. They hid. They lied. They turned freighters into torpedoes, asteroids into cruisers, and then blinked soldiers straight into a reactor room like ghosts. You couldn't chart that. You couldn't simulate that. You couldn't trust numbers against that. Varun rose from his cradle, silencing the chamber. Retreat is not an option, he said coldly, but you are right about one thing. Doctrine fails against vermin, so we stop treating them as a fleet, we treat them as an infection, and infections are burned. He pointed one claw at the blue world spinning in the holosphere. Prepare for planetary strikes, strip their orbitals, torch their industries, kill the story before it spreads. Humanity will be remembered for nothing but ash. Down on Haven Prime, the colonists didn't know half the words being screamed in the Dominion flagship. What they did know was what they could see with their own eyes. The sky flashed again and again, bursts of fire blooming in orbit as ships danced and died. Some swore they saw whole new fleets appear in the belt, shadows flaring and vanishing, lances firing from invisible hulls. The stories spread before anyone could stop them. The ghost fleet's real, people whispered in shelters. Not 5 ships, 50, 100, invisible ships fighting above us. Mothers told it to children to keep them calm. Old miners swore they'd seen it themselves from the ridgelines. Fear was being replaced with something dangerous. Belief. Belief that humanity wasn't prey. On the Valiant, Karan stood with his arms crossed, watching Dominion formations tighten. He knew what Varun would do next. The wall wasn't for show anymore. It was for killing. Marrow came to his side, voice low. They're scared. You can see it. They're second-guessing, twitching at shadows. Maybe that's enough. Maybe we pull back Mirage before they burn the belt clean. No, Corin said. His gaze didn't waver from the glowing red icons. We push it harder. Harder. Sir, half the emitters are already cooking themselves. If we drive them hotter, we lose them permanently. No fallback. Karan's reply was simple. Then we lose them permanently. Better than losing Haven. The officer swallowed. He wanted to argue, but the look in Corin's eyes stopped him. It wasn't recklessness. It was cold calculation. The kind you made when every other option had been stripped away. Corin stepped closer to the viewport, watching the Dominion wall loom larger. Escalate Mirage. Double the echoes. Make them see an entire battle group rising out of the rocks. Every phantom cruiser we can fake. Every carrier we can paint. Put it on their scopes. If they want to burn shadows, then bury them in shadows until they choke. Marrow stared at him like he'd lost his mind. Sir, you know what that'll cost. I do, Corrin said quietly. But better the machines burn than the colony. The crew got to work, fingers flying, sweat beating, voices cracking as they forced the Mirage grid past safe limits. Out in the belt, echoes multiplied like wildfire. What had been 40 Phantom ships became 60, then 80. The Dominion sensors flooded with impossible numbers, armadas rising where there had been none, carriers that blinked into being, destroyer packs sweeping their flanks. It was madness. It was obvious. It was chaos. And it was exactly what Quran wanted. Let them guess, he said, more to himself than anyone else. Let them drown in ghosts. Because even if the trick burned itself out tomorrow, even if the emitters fried and the belt went dark, the damage was already done. The Dominion had just learned the worst truth of all, that certainty could be broken, and that humanity, fragile and desperate as it was, knew exactly how to break it. The ghosts had done their job. Mirage was blazing at double heat, flooding Dominion scopes with fleets that didn't exist, phantoms that flared and vanished like wraiths in the rocks. For a while it kept them guessing. But Varun wasn't guessing anymore. The wall shifted. 12 system crackers angled their prows down, away from the belt, toward Haven Prime itself. Lances hummed, torpedo ports split open like jaws. They weren't coming to duel shadows anymore. They were coming to burn the colony. On the Valiant's deck, the air went heavy. Officers didn't need readouts to know what was happening. The way the red icons angled was enough. It was the unmistakable posture of a planetary reduction strike. Marrow swore under his breath. They're gonna torch us. They don't even care about the fleet anymore. Of course they don't, Corrin said, calm but hard. You can't kill what you can't find. So they're going to kill what they can see instead. His eyes didn't leave the viewport. Haven itself. Down on the planet, sirens screamed through the valleys and cities. Families scrambled for the shelters carved deep into bedrock, clutching children, clutching each other. They'd all heard the rumors. Dominion bombardments didn't just hit targets, they erased them. Glass cities, boiled oceans. The people of Haven had built their lives in storm seasons and mining accidents, but nothing prepared you for the sight of a dozen alien warships lighting up the sky. One of the outer orbital stations went first. A lance cut down from orbit, white hot, and the station bloomed into a fireball that sprayed molten wreckage across the stratosphere. From the ground, it looked like a second sun tearing itself apart. Thousands gone in a heartbeat. In the shelters, people sobbed. Some prayed, some cursed. Others just stared upward at the quaking roof and waited for it to fall. On the Valiant, the crew jolted as the explosion lit their feeds. An entire station gone, and they hadn't fired a shot to stop it. Sir, we can't just sit here, Marrow snapped. His face was pale, voice edged with panic. That's 10,000 lives gone. We've got to hit back. Even if it's suicide, we can't just watch. Corrin didn't turn. His voice was iron. You fire too soon. You give them a target. You show them where the real fleet is. Right now, they're shooting at phantoms. Let them. Another lance dropped. This one gutted a comm tower in low orbit, vaporizing its skeleton in a burst of glass and plasma. The comm blackout rippled down to the shelters, cutting families off from each other, silencing militia chatter. Quran's knuckles whitened behind his back, but he didn't move. He couldn't. Charging the wall now would be handing Vorun exactly what he wanted. Proof. Mirage still had to hold. Sir, if the bombardment continues, Haven dies, Corrin finished flatly. Yes, I know. So do your jobs. Keep the echoes dancing. The crew obeyed, but you could feel it. Rage and despair mixing. Soldiers gritting their teeth as their home burned and their commander refused to move. On the Dominion flagship, Vorun watched the destruction with satisfaction. See how quickly illusions vanish when the ground is fire, he said to his council. Their phantoms can dance forever in the rocks, but their colony cannot hide. And when the people are ash, no fleet matters. Torvek nodded, eager to please. The galaxy will see it. The humans tried deception, and it bought them nothing. Their name will be mud before it ever mattered. Rael muttered, unless, but he cut himself short when Varun's eyes snapped his way. Varun's mandibles curled. No unless. This ends now. Back on Haven, the shelters trembled as the third orbital station lit up. Civilians clung to the belief in the ghost fleet, whispering it like a charm. They're out there, someone swore. Invisible ships. They'll stop them. But with every explosion, hope cracked thinner. In the militia bunkers, captains screamed at their feeds, begging for orders. Some wanted to fire their antiquated rail batteries now, even if they'd just bounce off Dominion plating. But the command came back hard and cold. Hold fire. People cursed Karan's name. Some called him a coward. Others, stubborn, called him patient. On the Valiant, the storm built. Another station went down, Haven's orbital ring breaking apart like a necklace snapped and spilling beads into the dark. Thousands more dead. The crew's restraint was a knife edge. Marrow finally snapped. "Sir, I'm begging you. Just give me one salvo. One. Let us remind them we're still here." Corin turned then, slow and deliberate, and locked eyes with him. "If we fire now, we give them the truth. And the truth will kill every last one of us. Hold. The ghosts fight better than we do right now." The silence after was brutal, but the crew obeyed. Karan turned back to the viewport, jaw tight. He knew what the others didn't. Mirage was dying. Emitters were frying themselves one by one, cooking under the strain. The ghosts wouldn't last forever, and once they faded, the Dominion would see exactly how pitiful humanity's line really was. But until then, he'd squeeze every heartbeat from the illusion. Every second Haven lived was another second the Dominion flailed at shadows. "Escalate the grid again," Karan said finally. His voice was gravel, stripped raw. "Push the echoes closer. Make them look like they're massing for a countercharge." Marrow blinked. "Sir, if we do that, we burn them out completely. No reset." "I'm aware," Corin said. His tone left no room for argument. "Do it." And so the ghosts surged again. Phantom cruisers and destroyers crowded Dominion scopes, moving as if to pounce. From Voron's vantage, it looked like a fleet rising from the dead. He snarled, "So be it. Let them rise. We'll burn them all the same." On Haven, another lance fell. A city lit up like dawn, its towers melting into glass. In the shelters, people screamed. Corin closed his eyes for a heartbeat, then opened them again, steady. "Not yet," he whispered. "Not yet." Because he knew if the bombardment landed full force, Haven was finished. And if Mirage collapsed, humanity was finished. The knife edge was thinning, and one slip would cut them all. But he also knew this. Varun thought he was burning the truth out of shadows. And that arrogance, that need to prove doctrine right, was going to open him wide. Karan just had to hold long enough for the next card. The moon's guns were waiting. The Dominion lances had started cutting into Haven cities. White streaks burning across the sky, boiling rivers, turning towers into glass when it happened. The moon woke up. 1 second it was just a pale rock in orbit, cratered and quiet like it had always been. The next its ridges split open like jaws, and the ground itself spat fire. Long buried hatches peeled back, camouflaged rock slides rolled away, and barrels the length of skyscrapers rose out of hidden cradles. For 30 years, the colonists had whispered about secret projects tucked into the mines. Now the rumors stood 10 kilometers tall and glowing. Corin didn't flinch when the first railgun battery fired. He just watched as the beam tore across space, a silver streak moving so fast it looked like a god had drawn a line through the dark. The shot slammed into a Harrow-class system cracker mid-burn, right below its spinal lances. Armor buckled. The ship pitched like it had tripped over its own weight, reactors coughing as magnetic sheaths peeled away. On the Valiant, Marrow's mouth hung open. "Oh! Oh my God!" The bridge lit up with cheers, half joy, half disbelief. Somebody whooped, somebody else pounded their console so hard a screen cracked. Karan's voice cut through it like a blade. "Stay sharp, that's one cripple. 11 still breathing." The moon roared again. 2, 3, 4 batteries firing in sequence. Shots streaked past Dominion destroyers, close enough that even their captains blanched. One round tore straight through a frigate and kept going, barely slowed, debris scattering like confetti in its wake. Another slammed into the wounded Harrow, punching deeper, tearing plating open until the ship looked like a gutted animal. Fires spilled out into space, ugly red flames gnawing at vacuum before snuffing out. Down on Haven Prime, People in shelters heard the reports first. The moon's firing. They didn't believe it until they saw the night sky light up, silver arcs slashing upward. Cheers shook the caverns. Old miners swore the ghosts had dug the guns themselves. Mothers told their kids the moon was finally angry on their behalf. For a moment, panic flipped to euphoria. Up in the Dominion flagship, Vorun's chamber was chaos. The neat wall of ships was suddenly a target range, and the rock he'd dismissed as useless had just crippled one of his crown jewels. Torvek slammed his claws against the console. How? How did we miss weapons that size? Mardek's voice was tight. They buried them in mining shafts, Fleet Master. Masked the magnetic bleed as excavation equipment. We never scanned deep enough. Varun's eyes burned. Never scanned deep enough, he repeated. His mandibles clicked once, hard enough to echo. Fine. Then we dig them out with fire. He ordered the wall forward. Destroyers broke. Formation, engines flaring, diving toward the belt and the moon's orbit. The system crackers angled low, lances cutting arcs into rock, desperate to carve through before another shot landed. But Mirage was waiting. Quran had pushed it past safe, past sanity. Now the belt was alive with fleets, phantoms multiplying like rats. Where Dominion scans showed one cruiser, now there were three. A carrier echo lit up behind them, then a dozen destroyer shadows peeled off to flank. Every sweep, every counterbeam just made the picture worse. The Dominion couldn't tell real from fake, targets from noise. Push them deeper, Corrin ordered. His voice was gravel, steady, but the edges showed. He knew the emitters were dying, half were cooking themselves red, melting wires, frying circuits. But they had to hold. On the Dominion side, the effect was poisonous. Crews screamed into comms about ambushes. Escorts swore phantom lances had fired from rocks that didn't exist. Targeting arrays locked, lost, locked again. Half the destroyers turned their guns on shadows, blasting holes in asteroids that weren't hiding anything at all. Varun's fury hit the room like a storm. Press forward, clear the belt, burn everything that moves, ghost or not. His wall broke into chaos, order unraveling under the pressure of too many targets. Ships angled wrong, wasted firepower on fakes, while the moon's batteries kept pounding whenever Dominion forgot to respect them. Another shot scraped a system cracker's flank, shearing off an entire lance bank and sending debris tumbling like silver hail. Back on Haven, colonists stood at shelter hatches, watching arcs of light crisscross the sky. Some wept from relief, some from terror, but they all saw the same thing. The Dominion wasn't invincible. On the Valiant, Marrow muttered, like he couldn't help himself. We actually rattled them. Look at that. They're swatting shadows. They don't know what's real anymore. Quran didn't take his eyes off the viewport. Good, he said. Let them drown in ghosts. But his jaw was tight. He knew what the crew didn't. Mirage couldn't last forever, and the moon's guns had just painted the biggest target in the system. The Dominion wouldn't ignore them. And when they turned, the moon wouldn't survive without the fleet buying it time. Still, for one moment, humanity's ghosts and hidden guns had clawed the giant down a peg. And that moment mattered. Varun knew it too. He looked at the flickering mess of red icons, his perfect doctrine collapsing under illusions and minds and now moon cannons. He bared his teeth in something between rage and awe. Enough of shadow, he hissed. We'll rip the ghosts out of the rocks, even if we have to smash the system apart to do it. And with that, the Dominion pushed deeper into the belt, angry, blind, and walking straight into humanity's next trap. The Dominion wall surged into the belt, hungry and blind. Mirage was burning hot, spewing echoes like a fever dream. Phantom cruisers splitting into phantoms of phantoms, carriers blooming where no hulls existed, destroyers flanking destroyers that weren't even real. Vorun's perfect geometry had collapsed into a brawl with shadows, and the Dominion hated nothing more than not knowing where the real enemy was. That was when Quran finally gave the order his crew had been waiting for. Bring us out, he said, voice level. The Valiant and her 4 escorts broke cover, drives flaring for the first time in hours. Not charging, not suicidal, just flashing teeth. They didn't come straight at the Dominion. They angled, weaving through the asteroid fields in a tight run, darting between phantom signatures Mirage had painted. On the feeds, the illusion made them look like just another squadron among dozens, except this squadron fired real guns. Lances from the Valiant lit up the dark, cutting across the flank of a Dominion frigate and gutting it before the captain even realized which ghost had teeth. The escorts followed, laying down point defense nets, deliberately drawing the Dominion's gaze away from the moon batteries. "Fight hard," Corinne ordered. "Make them chase." And chase they did. The Dominion's destroyers, already twitchy, lunged toward the sudden blue blips that were firing real weapons. Their captains shouted for vengeance, for order, for clarity, anything to blot out the shame of being humiliated by shadows. They dove straight into the kill zone Quran had carved, flanked by rocks that hid more than echoes. Because tucked into those rocks, Haven's torpedo boats were waiting. Ugly little things no bigger than a mining barge. Stripped-down hulls bolted with plasma tubes, half their armor plates scavenged from civilian rigs. They were invisible until they weren't, and when the Dominion destroyers charged, the boats opened up. The belt turned into hell. Torpedoes streaked in salvos, hundreds at once, arcing like shooting stars through the rocks. Dominion PD systems roared to life, cutting sways through the swarm. But there were too many. Explosions lit the belt in flashes, destroyers torn apart mid-burn, frigates venting atmosphere, escorts scattering in panic. But Haven paid for it too. One torpedo boat took a rail burst square to the midsection, vanishing in a flash of molten debris. Another tried to dodge a Dominion corvette and got diced by lances, split into 3 glowing chunks that spun away like broken bones. The belt was littered with wreckage on both sides, ships real and phantom, corpses of illusions, and corpses of men all mixing in the same graveyard. On the Revenant, her carrier decks spat interceptors into the chaos. Human pilots, outgunned, outnumbered, threw themselves into knife fights with Dominion drones. Cockpits shook with rail bursts, comms filled with swearing, laughter, screaming. "I'm on him! I'm on him!" followed by static. It was a meat grinder, but every minute they stayed alive was another minute the Dominion couldn't get clean bearings. The Valiant took the brunt. She was the biggest, the loudest, the ship the Dominion wanted most. Lances stitched across her flank, cracking armor, shredding point defense turrets like they were tin cans. One hit gutted her ventral decks, venting crew into vacuum. Alarms blared, bulkheads sealed, and still Coran refused to pull her back. "She holds until she can't," he said, jaw like stone. Marrow slammed a fist against the railing. "She's dying, sir." "She dies pulling them in," Corin snapped back. His eyes never left the feed. "The belt will eat them if we hold." The Dominion pressed harder, destroyers swarming, frigates weaving through rocks, drones tearing into human interceptors. But Mirage kept painting ghosts between them, pulling their attention, making them waste salvos on ships that weren't there. And when they fired at shadows, the real guns bit back. Still, the price was ugly. 2 escorts went down, one torn open by a direct lance, another swallowed by torpedo fire it couldn't intercept. The belt lit with debris, crew screaming last calls into the void before silence cut them off. The torpedo boats thinned too, from dozens to a handful, their tricks spent, their ammo gone. And the Valiant, the old cruiser groaned like a dying animal. A final salvo of Dominion plasma hammered through her bow, rupturing compartments, setting fires that couldn't be smothered. Her drives stuttered, one reactor choking offline. On the bridge, smoke rolled through vents, the lights flickered, and still Coran stood unshaken. "Lock course," he ordered. "Keep her pointed at the wall." "Sir, if we don't pull her back—" "She's already back," Coran cut him off. His voice was flat, stripped of anything human. "Now she bleeds so Haven doesn't." The Valiant held the line, her lances firing one last ragged volley into a Dominion destroyer's throat, splitting it open even as her own guts tore loose. Sparks flew across her bridge. Men coughed blood. Coran's hands tightened behind his back, but he didn't look away. Down on Haven Prime, colonists saw the flashes streak across the sky. Some cheered, some wept, some whispered prayers. The stories grew bigger with every explosion. The ghost fleet's driving them back. The Valiant is leading them. They didn't know she was dying. They didn't know how much had already been lost. They only saw fire in the sky, and they believed. On the Dominion flagship, Vorun snarled as another destroyer marker winked out. His council whispered about traps, about illusions, about humans turning space itself into a weapon. But he didn't hear them. All he saw was red, the shame of being dragged into a brawl with rats and shadows, and the burning certainty that if he didn't crush this colony, now the story would outlive him. Press harder, he roared. I don't care if you drown in phantoms. Find their heart and rip it out. But there was no heart to find. Only ghosts, only bait, only a colony buying minutes with blood. On the Valiant's bridge, smoke stinging his eyes, Karan whispered to no one in particular, "One more run, just one more." And the Dominion, blind with rage, pushed deeper into the kill zone. The belt was chaos, smoke, debris, fire streaks, real and fake. The Dominion ships had surged after the Valiant, teeth bared, and now they were smack in the middle of the nastiest trick Karan had ever laid. Mirage was screaming hot. Its last pulses weren't neat or subtle anymore. They were messy, violent, layered illusions stacked on top of each other until the entire sector looked like a damn funhouse mirror. Destroyers saw 3 fleets where there was one. Frigates read enemy cruisers in their own formations. Escorts tried to align on signals that didn't exist. Dominion pilots cursed and screamed, some firing at shadows, some swerving away only to smash into friendly hulls. Corrin stood on the Revenant's deck, arms crossed tight, eyes locked on the chaos. His knuckles were white. Every second the Dominion stayed tangled in Mirage's field was a second Haven got to breathe. Every second was blood well spent. "Mirage is overheating," Ensign Lyra muttered, sweat dripping down her brow as she fought to keep the emitters from frying themselves. "We've maybe got one more hard pulse before the whole thing blows." "Then make it count," Corrin said. The Valiant was gone now, silent, wreckage drifting, but her death had pulled Vorun's entire spearhead right into the cage, and Corran was about to slam the door. On the Dominion flagship, it was panic barely covered by rage. Vorun's mandibles clicked like grinding stone. "Why are our destroyers firing on each other? Get control of your formations." But there was no control. His wall was collapsing into knots. Ships barking fire in all directions. Escorts swerving into frigates. Drones misreading targets that were only ghosts. A cruiser even fired broadside lances directly into its sister ship, convinced it was a human hull. The blast carved the cruiser in half, venting crew in screaming streams of blue-white light. The Dominion had doctrine for everything: precision, order, formation. But they had no doctrine for this. An enemy that didn't stand still, didn't show its teeth, just let you punch yourself in the face. On Haven's surface, colonists huddled in shelters, staring up at the night sky. They saw flickers like lightning storms, red and gold blooms where ships died, and word spread fast. The aliens are killing each other. Mothers clutched children tighter. Fathers let out shaky laughs. Old miners whispered that maybe, just maybe, the ghosts were real. "Ready?" Corrin asked. The crew stared at him, like he'd just asked if they were ready to jump naked into a firestorm. The Revenant shuddered as her drive spooled. This wasn't like the feints, the flashes, the dart and hide games. This was the ambush, the final cut. They were about to put themselves right into the mouth of the beast and bet that Vorun would be too blind and too angry to see the knife. "Blink insertion in 3, Helm called, voice cracking just once before she bit it down. The Revenant jumped. Phase drive roared, the stars stretched, and then they were there, inches from hell. The flagship's massive silhouette loomed dead ahead, an armored mountain wrapped in chaos. The ship's alarms screamed instantly. "Target lock!" someone shouted. "Not yet," Corrin said, voice flat as stone. His eyes narrowed at the tactical feed. "Wait." Around them, Dominion destroyers were blasting away at phantoms, their lances streaking wide. One clipped the flank of a cruiser already spinning out, finishing it off. The fleet was cannibalizing itself, frenzy spreading like infection. "Sir, flagship is aligning weapons." "Not yet," Corrin repeated. Mirage's emitters were frying, sparks spitting from consoles, the pulse building like a dying scream. Then Lyra turned, eyes wide. "It's ready, sir, but it'll burn out." Then burn it, Corin said. Mirage let out one last pulse, a brutal, ugly surge that lit the belt like a flare. On Dominion sensors, the entire asteroid field split into copies of itself. 3 fleets, 3 revenants, 3 entire phantom walls overlapping in perfect lines. The Dominion flagship twisted, confused, its escorts stumbling over each other as they tried to cover all directions at once. Now, Corin said. The Revenant opened fire. Lances punched through the flagship's starboard flank, burning holes through armor. Torpedoes followed, slamming into weak points Mirage had mapped weeks ago. The flagship staggered, like a beast taking a blade in the ribs, not dead but bleeding. Varun's council screamed around him, voices high-pitched with disbelief. It's real. It's real this time. Return fire, Varun bellowed, spittle flying. But the flagship's own destroyers were blocking her arcs, convinced the Revenant was still a phantom and that the real enemy was hiding somewhere else. They fired wide, scorching their own, hammering ghosts. On the Revenant, Kuran braced as counterfire finally screamed back. Rail slugs ripped across the hull, shaking decks, throwing crew to the ground. Bulkheads split, sparks rained, one engine coughed smoke. Men swore, dragged themselves back to stations, and kept firing. The kill zone was closed now. Dominion ships, dozens of them, were jammed into the overlap of Mirage fields, blind, firing on each other while Haven's surviving torpedo boats and orbital guns pounded them from hidden vectors. The Revenant circled like a shark, darting in and out of sensor, shadows tearing chunks out of anything that dared line her up. But every cut was answered. She was bleeding too, armor peeling, point defense turrets sparking out one by one. Still, Corin stood like a statue. "We've got him," he said, voice hoarse. And for the first time, his crew believed it. Because in that madness, in that tangle of ghosts and fire, the Dominion flagship was stuck, trapped in the funnel Corin had built from smoke and mirrors and blood. One more push, and Varun would be right where they wanted him. Alone, blind, bleeding, and within reach of the kill shot. The funnel had worked. The Dominion flagship wasn't just pinned, it was flailing, its escorts shredded, its destroyers tearing each other apart in the phantom field. All that was left now was the monster itself, and Kuran had just jumped his ship straight into its shadow. The Revenant came out a blink less than 20 clicks from the flagship's hull. That close, you could see the beast's scars. Gashes still smoking from torpedo strikes. Armor plates twisted like peeled fruit. But its guns were still alive, still hungry. "Knife fight range," Helm muttered, voice tight. "We're gonna get chewed alive out here." "We already are," Corin said, never taking his eyes off the flagship. "So we bite back harder." The first salvo came screaming in, massive slugs that turned space itself into shockwaves. The Revenant juked, blink drive spitting sparks as it skipped a fraction sideways, but one slug still grazed the port side. The entire ship shook like a dying animal, alarms blaring, crew clutching their stations. "Guns, full spread," Corin barked. The Revenant spat fire, rail slugs, and torpedoes at point-blank range. The Dominion flagship absorbed most of it. Its armor was thick enough to eat a city. But this close, even mountains cracked. Plasma scorched black streaks across its hull. Torpedoes burrowed deep and detonated, venting huge fountains of molten metal. The crews on Haven watching from below saw 2 stars locked together, flashing, colliding, ripping chunks out of each other. It looked less like a battle and more like 2 gods trying to kill each other with bare fists. Then came the boarding attempt. Kuran's Marines had been waiting, weapons mag-locked, drop sleds hot. As the Revenant knifed across the flagship's hull, they fired their sleds like spears, stabbing into the armor and cutting entry points. For a few minutes, it worked. Marines stormed corridors, cutting through Dominion troops, planting charges. They made it as far as the outer engineering decks before the swarm hit. The Dominion flagship vomited soldiers like blood cells fighting an infection, chittering, armored, relentless. They flooded the corridors in waves, slamming against human fire teams until the comms filled with static and screams. Kuran heard the reports, one by one. "Delta team overrun. Alpha's cut off. Charges. Lost." Then silence. The bridge went quiet too. Everyone knew what that silence meant. Corin didn't flinch. They bought us time, he said, voice raw but steady. Now we spend it. The Revenant skimmed so close to the flagship's hull that sparks jumped between their fields, plating scraping plating. Gunners switched to plasma lances. Short range, brutal, ugly things. Line it up, Corin ordered. The flagship finally found its bite. A broadside of heavy lances ripped across the Revenant, smashing through armor, gutting entire compartments. Bulkheads tore loose. Atmosphere vented. Men and women went screaming into the void. The bridge lights flickered, and for the first time, the Revenant groaned like it was dying. Starboard batteries offline. Shields gone. We can't take another volley. Corin cut them off. His jaw tightened, his eyes locked on the enemy ship filling the entire view. Every ghost you saw, he let the words hang in the smoke-choked air, is a grave we dug for you. Then he slammed his fist down. Fire! The Revenant's forward plasma lance ignited. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't a clean beam. It was a screaming, unstable core of white-blue fire, channeled down a barrel that was never meant to handle that much raw fury at once. The recoil shook the entire ship, but it hit. It punched straight into the Dominion flagship's bridge tower. Armor melted, bulkheads tore, and then the entire structure exploded outward like a candle flame snuffed by a hammer. For one frozen second, the Dominion flagship, this mountain of death that had come to wipe Haven off the map, was blind, leaderless, a beast with its head cut clean off. On the Revenant's bridge, silence followed the blast. Nobody cheered, nobody laughed. They just stared, panting, covered in sweat and blood, knowing what it had cost. The Dominion flagship was still alive, still thrashing, but without its brain, without command. Karan exhaled slowly. It's not dead, he said almost to himself, but it's finished. The crew looked at him, waiting for the next order. And Karan's eyes stayed locked on the shattered tower ahead, his face carved in stone. Because he knew the fight wasn't over. Not yet. But for the first time, Haven Prime had just made the Dominion bleed like it never had before. The Dominion flagship staggered like a beheaded beast, guns still snapping at anything that glowed. But the brain gone, the bite confused. The shattered bridge tower vented a glittering storm of wreckage and bodies. Then even that faded, replaced by a dull, ugly burn where command used to live. Corin didn't celebrate. He just pointed the Revenant's nose along the flagship's spine and kept cutting. Short bursts, slice, slip, vanish. The carrier was coughing smoke, armor hanging in ribbons, but she still fought like a cornered dog. All across the belt, Dominion formations. Lost the plot. Some captains raged forward, dumping lances into anything that twitched. Others threw themselves into cover arcs that didn't exist, guarding phantoms that flickered and died the second you looked straight at them. A few finally understood and tried to pull their ships out of the mirage bands. Too late. A destroyer lurched sideways to dodge a ghost and rammed a frigate. A corvette squadron chased a sensor echo straight into a torpedo fan and evaporated in one white breath. The wounded Harrow that the moon guns had peeled open earlier finally gave up. Its skin tore in a slow, yawning rip from bow to belly. Heat spilled out, crimson and ugly. The big ship listed, rolled, and came apart in slabs, shuddering like a mountain falling into the sea. That made 2 system crackers down, one scuttled by its own crew, one killed in front of everyone. The council on the Dominion flagship tried to staple command back together from surviving compartments. It was theater more than control. The orders came late, contradictory, shouted over alarms. Hold, advance. Clear the belt. Protect the flagship. Each order landed like a different drumbeat. The fleet tried to march to all of them and tripped over its own feet. On Haven Prime, men stepped out of shelters because they couldn't stand the not knowing anymore. The sky burned in streaks and blossoms. Wreckage fell as shooting stars that died long before they reached air. People shaded their eyes and pointed. A kid swore he could see 2 giants wrestling. Someone said the ghosts were winning. Someone else said shut up and let the giants work. On the Revenant, Karan finally felt the moment shift. The kind of tilt you only notice after too many battles, when the enemy's spine breaks and the rest of the body hasn't figured it out yet. Hold course, he said. No shouting, no flourish, just a steady hand on a dying ship. The flagship fired a last, senseless barrage. Rail slugs shredded a field of rocks, 1,000 clicks to the left, of anything that mattered. Its escorts, having finally realized the Revenant was actually there, swung to block and slammed into a fresh wall of phantoms. Mirage had nothing elegant left. It just howled static into every open eye and dared the Dominion to make sense of it. Then the tone of the battle changed again. Not loud this time. Not a fanfare. A slump. Destroyers turned tail. Frigates rolled and showed their engines. Drones curled back to tenders. One by one, captains decided they were done dying in a maze. Retreat. No one declared it like a banner. It just spread. The logic of self-preservation washing outward from the flagship's ruin. The nearest ships went first. The proud ones hesitated, then saw a heavy's hull peel and found their nerve for caution. Even the zealots blinked when a railgun line from the moon shaved the paint off their lances and carved a notch out of pride. "Let them go," Corin said when a junior officer begged for pursuit. "We don't chase a tide out." The Revenant drifted on a slow arc, guns quiet, as the invaders unstitched themselves from the belt. Those who could still sprint, sprinted. Those who couldn't, limped. Scarred slabs, scraping at impulse. Escorts dragging them like injured beasts. A few crippled hulks refused to move and were left behind, drifting with their lights out. The flagship didn't explode. It just went dark in chunks, like a city losing power neighborhood by neighborhood. The belt exhaled. Mirage finally burned itself out. Emitters cracked, lines fused, the last ugly pulse dying into a tired hiss. The ghosts left as suddenly as they'd come. For the first time in hours, what you saw matched what was actually there. A human carrier bleeding out, a few escorts battered and scorched, torpedo boats that looked like knives with pieces broken off, the moon with its mouth still smoking. And the Valiant, she was there too. What was left of her? A big, noble hulk turning slow cartwheels, lights winking, wounded in 50 places, but still stubbornly in one piece. "Report from Valiant's deck," Marrow said, voice rough. "No engines, no spin control. She's just drifting." "Get her a tug. 2, if we have them," Corin answered. "She earned a berth." He said it like a simple thing, like he wasn't speaking around a cracked throat. They moved among the wrecks. Human survivors in pressure suits waved tiny suit lights and banged on hulls. Search craft fished them out, one by one, sometimes 2 at a time, when luck allowed it. Sometimes the lights didn't wave back. Names went up on lists. The list got long and stayed that way. On the Dominion side, a destroyer that had lost everything but its spine wobbled, tried to light a drive, and failed. A tender nosed in to help, thought better of it, and turned away. Another Harrow limped past with panels dangling like torn flags, pain written into the shape of its wake. Somewhere in that mess, a captain decided no lesson was worth this noise and pushed his throttle hard enough to melt seals. Good for him. Live to explain your shame. The moon guns lowered back into their holes, coils cooling, rails glowing dull orange in the shadows. The men who kept them alive slumped against big singing machines and let themselves breathe. Some laughed like fools. Some stared at their hands for a long time. One pointed at the cooling barrels and said, "You did your job," like he was talking to a tired horse. Down on Haven, hatches opened. Men climbed out into streets that smelled like ozone and dust. They looked up. The sky was a bruise, smeared with the streaks of a dozen fires. Bits of Dominion alloy burned up and painted thin, bright scratches from horizon to horizon. No one cheered right away. It wasn't that kind of win. It was a drag-through-glass win, a we-get-to-wake-up-tomorrow win. Someone knelt and pressed both hands to the ground. Someone else sat on a curb and cried without sound. Folks hugged and then let go quickly, because letting go made the hugging real, and they weren't ready for real yet. Rescue crews hauled the last of the survivors off the Revenant's decks and handed out water and blankets like that could fix a chest full of shrapnel. Rask limped past with a bandage on his side and a stare that said he'd left too many names in a hallway he'd never see again. He nodded at Corin and kept moving. There wasn't anything to say that didn't cost more than it was worth. Damage control? Marrow asked finally, like a man asking how much the bill is after a bar fight. Corin looked over his ship. Bulkheads splinted, deck plates scorched. A third of the point defense grid gone. A crawl of welders already at work because busy hands don't shake. He let the picture land and then nodded once, like you do when someone tells you the truth you expected. Alive, he said. That's the report. He turned to the viewport and watched the Dominion snake off into the dark, a long trail of shame and leaking fire. They'll be back, Marrow said, because somebody had to say it. Of course, Corin answered, but not tomorrow. He didn't add the rest out loud. When they return, they'll bring counters for tricks, answers for ghosts, doctrine rewritten around our throats. That was for later. Today was for counting who still stood. Tugcraft finally got lines on the Valiant and began the slow pull toward the docks. The old cruiser drifted obediently, proud even in ruin, like an exhausted boxer letting friends walk him out of the ring. On the ground, men climbed the ridge above the spaceport and looked out at a sky with more red in it than any dawn had a right to wear. One pointed up and said, "That burning? That's them leaving." Another answered, "That burning's us too." Neither was wrong. Haven Prime didn't roar victory. It didn't have the lungs. It just breathed, in, outside, still here. Corin stayed at the viewport until the last Dominion drive flare dimmed to nothing. He didn't smile. He didn't scowl. He just made a small nod to nobody and said, "We bought the day." Marrow heard him and let out a breath he'd been holding since the first alarm. "Day's good," he said. "Day's a start." "And tomorrow," Corin said, "we start making the story hurt more than the numbers." Behind him, the crew settled into the quiet jobs. Lists, welds, triage, chaplain words that weren't written down anywhere. Out in the black, wrecks turned slowly like old coins. Haven's moon cooled. The planet turned. The Dominion was gone. For now. Wreckage and crippled hulks marked the line where arrogance had met a beltful of ghosts and a colony that refused to die on cue. Above a bruised world under a burned sky, humanity stood up again. Not tall, not clean, but up. The Dominion was gone, limping out of Haven's sky like a thief who just caught a fistful of glass. But the silence they left behind wasn't peace. It was the quiet of smoke still rising, alarms still whining, people trying to count the bodies and figure out if they had the right to call this survival. Haven's capital was a mess of cracked domes and half-toppled towers. The orbital stations were shattered wreaths of twisted metal. Thousands dead, maybe more. They wouldn't know for weeks. Fires still burned in the lower districts where debris had punched straight through roofs, and yet people walked outside again. That was the miracle no bombardment could erase. Corin left the command deck to his officers and went down to the hangar. Not the clean, polished hangar of the Revenant's first days, but the gutted, smoke-stinking ruin it had become. One whole bulkhead was blackened from plasma blowback. The deck plates were scored with grooves where crash foam hadn't fired fast enough. What was left of fighters sat like torn birds, wings cracked and noses broken, and between them were the rows. Dozens of bodies lined in shrouds of canvas, each tagged with nothing more than a number. Someone had laid helmets at the head of each row. Some human, some cobbled from vac suits, one or two Dominion trophies taken from kills. No one had the strength for speeches. Corin walked the line slowly, his boots crunching on stray shards of hull. He paused at each row and brought his hand up in a tired, deliberate salute. No flourish, just wait. His throat stayed shut the whole time, but every step landed heavier. At the far end, he stopped. There was a smear of dried blood on the deck where someone had tried to drag a casualty before the medics gave up. He crouched, touched the stain, and whispered something only the steel and the ghost could hear. When he rose again, the hangar was full of eyes. His crew hadn't followed him down for orders. They just wanted to see what he'd do. And what he did was stand straight, exhausted, and say one thing. They stand with us still. Not they died for us. Not they gave us victory. Just that. And the crew nodded, because that was exactly right. Outside the hangar, Haven was stirring. Families stepped out of shelters and into streets still glowing with embers. They saw the wreckage burning in orbit and the strange stillness of a sky without a fleet pressing down on it. And slowly voices rose. Not cheers. No one had the lungs for that yet. Just words. A murmur that spread from block to block, from one shaken survivor to another. The ghost fleet stands. It wasn't about the mirage anymore. It wasn't about emitters or false echoes. It was about the idea that humanity had pulled shadows out of the dark and made them fight. That even against numbers that should have drowned them, they stood. Children picked it up and chanted it like a rhyme. Old men muttered it like a prayer. Soldiers carried it like a banner you couldn't shoot down. By nightfall, you could walk the streets of Haven and hear it from every corner. The ghost fleet stands. Up in the Dominion camps, the retreat turned into a contagion of fear. Reports flew through channels, each one uglier than the last. Captains spoke of phantom armadas, impossible weapons, railguns and moons, carriers that blinked through walls of fire. No one's story matched, but they all agreed on the conclusion. Humans weren't a puzzle to solve. They were a trap you could never map, because every step was already wired to blow. The language in the reports shifted. Enemy became anomaly. Resistance became phenomenon. They stopped describing humanity like an opponent and started describing them like a natural disaster. Varun's name vanished from dispatches, swallowed by the silence of disgrace. Some said he'd died in the wreck of the flagship, others that he'd been taken in chains. None of it mattered. The stains stuck. Every Dominion officer who'd survived carried it on their record. They'd faced ghosts and lost. And fear, real fear, spread faster than fire. Quran stood again on the bridge of the Revenant. The ship was barely a ship anymore, half its guts hanging on patches and prayers. But she floated. That was enough. Marrow leaned on a console like a man too tired to bother pretending he wasn't. "So that's it?" he asked. "They run? We rebuild? We wait for round two?" Corin shook his head. "They run, we remind ourselves what we are. Next round doesn't start until we say it does." Marrow gave him a sidelong look, then cracked the ghost of a smile. "You're starting to sound like a myth yourself, Captain." "No," Corin said. His eyes drifted to the viewport, to the scarred horizon of Haven below. "I'm just making sure the myth sticks long enough to save us." Later that night, down in the battered streets, the colonists gathered. Someone dragged out a cracked loudspeaker, barely working, and set it up in the central square. Someone else raised the flag, half-burned, edges torn, but still hanging. And they spoke, not in polished speeches, but in rough voices broken from shouting and smoke. They spoke of the ships that had bled to keep them alive. They spoke of the freighters that went out knowing they wouldn't come back. They spoke of the friends who'd fought in darkness, with nothing but desperation and tricks, and still managed to scare an empire. And they ended with the same vow, shouted until the words became thunder, until even the children's voices cracked trying to keep up. "The Ghost Fleet stands!" Corin didn't stand on the stage. He watched from the shadows at the edge of the crowd. He knew better than to steal that moment. It wasn't his. It belonged to the people who lived through the fire and decided they weren't done yet. Still, when the chant rolled over him, it landed deep. For the first time since the battle began, he let his shoulders ease. Just a fraction. Enough. Because the Dominion could come back with twice the ships, with counters for every trick. They could rewrite their doctrine, double their guns, strip their pride down to the bone. But it wouldn't matter. Not anymore. Because humanity had already written the one line that mattered, the one the Dominion would never scrub from their records. The Ghost Fleet stands. And sometimes, belief is the sharpest weapon of all. The night wore on. The fires dimmed. The dead were counted. The wounded were tended. And above a broken world, the Revenant and her sisters drifted in silence, scarred and half dead but unbowed. Tomorrow would bring more battles, more blood, more debts to pay. But tonight, Haven slept under a vow that burned brighter than the stars. The Ghost Fleet stood. And that was enough. If this story of Haven's survival gave you chills, Hit that subscribe button for more thrilling HFY tales where humanity turns the impossible into victory. Now we want to hear from you. If you were in command of the Ghost Fleet, what trick or deception would you unleash to terrify an empire? Drop your answer in the comments. We read every single one. Thanks for watching Stellar HFY, where strategy wins wars before they're ever fought. See you in the next story.